Alright y'all, sorry about that. I'm gonna have to break this into two parts, which is alright. So here we go with part two. Thank you for bearing with me. So as I was saying, The Cure, right? Now I understand at that show not everybody was, you know, a goth in the audience. I'm sure there were metalheads there. I'm sure there were just kind of muggles and normies, quote unquote, that were just there to enjoy the music because they like The Cure, because that kind of universal appeal of The Cure. But either way, biggest band in the scene, right? They had a pretty big audience. They had sold out stadiums and whatnot. That's a pretty good thing. So with that, I recently just saw the Sisters of Mercy, right? Well, you know, Andrew Eldridge and the others. And you know what? The fog wasn't that bad. But either way, an interesting aspect of that show in particular was the fact that I would say, you know, there were probably about a solid, at least half of the audience were solid, you know, goth fans and like in the goth scene, but there were also a lot of metalheads that were out there. So it really brought a pretty big group, and they were able to have a decent audience, you know, at least maybe maybe 2,000 people, which is pretty remarkable. So this past year, we've seen some pretty decent, like, size events with bands. And unfortunately, I have seen, you know, some rough aspects where, you know, Christian Death, you know, obviously, since, you know, Ross, they're not exactly, you know, the same level of popularity. But in my humble opinion, their latest album, you know, with Valor, etc., the latest album was pretty darn good. Was Evil Becomes Rule. So I thought it was pretty darn good. But either there, when I was seeing them perform, what was that, you know, a year ago or whatnot, well over a year ago, at least into last year, I mean, goodness gracious, they played at a venue and there was probably only about 30 or odd people. So some of even these bigger name acts are not getting a sizable audience. Now, like I said, there's some legacy acts that are doing it, but some of the bands it's a struggle. Now, going along with that, one of the major aspects that is part of that decline of the goth scene, whether you want to say the gradual decline or, you know, even a swifter decline recently, but either way, this is kind of the compare and contrast. In the metal scene, a lot of the older bands, especially in the like underground black and death metal scenes, they will tour with young and upcoming bands. Bands like Cannibal Corpse. I mean, they always bring like young talent. And let's put it this way, some of that young talent has become bigger than Cannibal Corpse, right? I think they even toured with, what, Lamb of God early on? And like now Lamb of God's, you know, much bigger than them. But they've done that, right? They've toured with bands like that. And so that's happening in the metal scene, where legacy, quote-unquote, bands are touring with new and up-and-coming bands. Let's put it this way, Metallica is one of the biggest metal bands, right? They're playing shows with, like, what was it, Epica, you know, in Europe, where they're having them open. I mean, that's pretty big. And I know there's a few others that had the chance to open for Metallica, but that's a big deal. Here's one of the issues. Are you seeing the legacy act goth bands doing the same? Do you see Bauhaus taking out like Nosferatu, or The Cure taking like Incubus Succubus? Are you seeing any of that? You tell me. I'm sure there are. Like, even, you know, as I mentioned, Christian Death have taken out, and they've had local support, which is pretty cool. There's a few others, I'm sure, like The Mission, I think had like The Awakening, or at least Ashton Knight tour with them. So some of it's happening, and I'm sure festivals, yeah, there's going to be some crossover. But the big question I ask are any of these legacy acts taking out younger, newer talent? And I think the vast majority of them are not. And I get it. A lot of the legacy acts have tried to get away from the goth label. But unfortunately, some of the younger talent have suffered because of it, because they just don't get the exposure, they don't get the support. So it's an unfortunate aspect. So going along with that, that's one of the big issues in the scene, and then additionally just the overall economy. I mean, since 2020, right? Since 2020, things have been pretty rough economically. So promoters, they can't take risks and whatnot, and oftentimes the young talent suffer because of it. And a lot of times bands aren't able to tour and overseas, etc. So continuing onward, you've kind of seen the social decline, the economic decline, and going into more of the social decline and cultural decline. One of the big things is that, you know, when you see a band like the Sisters of Mercy, like, what's the average age of the audience? You're seeing a lot of older folks that are participating and enjoying it, but are we really passing the torch on to the younger generations? And so going along with this, probably the most controversial statement I will make this entire video will be that when it comes to social identity, things have definitely shifted. Since 2013, 2014, 2015, you've seen kind of like identity in certain cultural aspects kind of shift into other aspects, where it's whether it's sexual, racial, cultural, whatnot, political ideology and identity, and they're shifting away from music. Because when I got into the scene, it didn't matter what your belief was, it didn't matter what your political beliefs were, none of that crap mattered. What mattered was that you were a fan of the music and enjoyed it. Unfortunately, that has drifted away, where drama, cliques, you know, promoters not getting along with other promoters and people disliking each other. I get it, but at the same time, you know, it's really gotten to the point where, like, you know, this person did this, this person did that, and I mean, I get it, we're goths, we're emotional, right, but we're not emo, alright, we're not that bad. But the point of the matter is, it's like, good golly, folks, like, chill out, right? We're supposed to love the music and build each other up because of it. So that's definitely a rough aspect. So I had a friend bring it up last year, and they said this was the most controversial thing. They said, well, one of the biggest detriments to music subcultures and music identity has been the LGBTQ movement. And I was like, whoa, that's a pretty harsh statement to bring up. Like, what do you mean by that? And essentially what he said is, well, think about it. Younger generations, like when we were in school, music was at the forefront of our identity. Like the metal and goth and kids all sat together. There were punk kids that sat together. There were rap fans that sat together. There was, you know, what else was there, like pop, you know, whatever. Like, you were almost defined clique-wise. I mean, there were other things like sports and activities and stuff like that. But, you know, the fact that we were sitting in lunch tables based on what we listened to, that's how big of a deal music was as far as our identity. But, you know, think about it, like in your past, in less than the past decade, identity has kind of shifted into other things, you know, political ideologies. But going along with what my friend said, essentially he said, well, think about it, younger people are more focused on their sexual identity than a music identity. And you do see that with kind of your college-age kids now and kind of your, like, younger 20s and late teens, where their sexual identity is at the forefront of their identity. And you see it where some clubs are trying to pull that crowd in. They're trying to say, hey, you're a part of this. And in some ways, you know, maybe it's working for them, maybe not, but the music identity's left. And so I think because of it, there's been a lot of friction. There's been a lot of, you know, where it's losing the music identity and shifting into other identities, where that's taking place. And so with that, it's caused a detriment. And think about it, when you're hyper focused on kind of sexual identity, you're going to have a crowd that either supports it or doesn't. Because think about it, the LGBTQ, etc., that's almost like its own subculture. And there's bands that, you know, are kind of like popular, etc., but it's not within the realm of the goth scene. So you have it where it's kind of like different subcultures. It's the same way of like a goth event trying to pull like metalheads and punks into it too. But when sexuality is at the forefront, you know, is it working, is it not? And so that's a big attribute of it, where younger generations, the music is not at the forefront of their identity. So that was the point that this individual made to me, and I've been curious about it. And like I said, it's a pretty hotbed topic. You know, both myself and the individual, we come from a Christian background, so maybe y'all will be like, oh, well, that's a certain bias. And I'm like, whatever, but the point of the matter is, like, look, there are people that are, you know, a certain sexual identity, but music is still at the forefront of their identity, right? So it's at the forefront of their identity, whereas their sexuality it's part of the, you know, it's put in the back burner. But it's an aspect of it where right now, I mean, you've seen it with different folks that are, you know, literally engaging in, you know, violent confrontation over, what is it, like, in schools when it comes to sexual education and everything. So it's at the forefront of their identity, and anybody or anything that attacks that, it's like, the enemy. So it creates this kind of, for lack of a better term, it's kind of narrow-minded, right? Whereas there's less tolerance. It's kind of interesting, right? The whole point of tolerance is that you don't have to accept somebody else, like somebody else's, like, whatever subculture, or not just subculture, but political, you know, religious views or whatnot, but it's the fact that you essentially just kind of put up with it. You're not accepting it, but you're putting up with it. So there's definitely been a lack of tolerance, and going along with that, you're entering also kind of not to get too much into cancel culture and whatnot, but you're definitely getting into this nitpicking, but also like competition. Nobody's working together, whereas, you know, folks should be working together, whether it's in a city or across the country. There should be this camaraderie associated with a love and passion for the music. So in the end, what it comes down to is the fact that the music identity has, you know, been gradually declining, and the fact that it's at the forefront of somebody's, you know, what they love and what they're passionate about. So going along with that, so I covered the music, I covered that aspect. And let's see, is there anything else? Is there anything else as far as kind of part of the decline that I can think of off the top of my head? I think I covered it because I did have to, I had to go back and go through this. But let's put it this way. Let's get into the hope. Let's get into the optimism. Is there a chance for revival? Is there anything that can happen? Well, I'll tell you what. Younger generations, from what I've seen, are starting to get into just music in general, and it's being a part of their identity. And so this gives me hope. I have seen younger generations of goths out and about, and I myself, if I've had the opportunity, encourage them to check out bands and music. And so hopefully this continues to grow. I know other nations around the world. Mexico is booming with the scene. You're seeing, you know, bands like Nosferatu play over there and get a crowd of like 700, which is incredible, incredible. And so hopefully it continues to grow. Europe, I hope, stays strong with their scene. I know Germany, Meryl Luna, Wave, Gothic, Treppen. Hopefully they're able to continue with their numbers. Younger generations will get into them. And hopefully with music that's out there on platforms, people are able to get into it. People are sharing it. And so that's the main thing. That's the main thing, that